Welcome to the WACO Experience, an American story.
We, the people.
With your host, D. Scott Smith.
In order to form a more perfect union.
Interviews with leaders in business, government, and nonprofit organizations.
Promote the general welfare.
Jobs, products and services, and infrastructure for strong communities. Secure
the blessings of liberty.
The WACO Experience is an American story, a story of communities across America. It is your story.
One of the very first chimney inspections I did, actually, the house was 18 months old. They'd only used it for one winter, and the chimney was resting on 2x4s in a couple of different places, and it already caught two of them on fire.
On this episode of the WACO Experience, an American story, Micah Abels of Abels Top Hat Home Services. I'm your host, D. Scott Smith. You can learn more about this program and sponsors and find links to the podcast version of this program at thewacoexperience.com. Visit our sponsors, White Bluffs Construction, custom building, home remodeling, and I encourage you to call Seth at 254-227-2002 and schedule White Bluffs Construction to build your patio, deck, or pergola. Visit their website, whitebluffsconstruction.com. My wife and I had questions about healthcare insurance. Monica Shannon of Texas Healthcare for You listened to us, answered our questions, and helped my family find the right coverage. Call Monica today at 254-339-3421. Visit the website, txhealthcareforyou.com. That's txhealthcare, the number 4 and the letter U.com. Biddy and Beau's Coffee offers hot and cold beverages, catering, and provides employment for people with disabilities. They offer a conference room you can reserve and use at no cost. Visit Biddy and Beau's Coffee today at 110 Franklin in Waco. The Cactus Rose Ranch. Young, old, or in between, learning how to work with a horse is confidence building. Cactus Rose Ranch offers individual lessons or monthly memberships. Contact them for riding lessons or ranch parties and their nonprofit program, Healing Heroes with Horses. Online at thecactusroseranch.com. The Waco Independent Film Festival. This award-winning festival, full of incredible movies, amazing people, and parties, runs July 17 to 20 in downtown Waco. Get tickets and information online at wacoindie.com. That's wacoindie.com. Come to Waco, tell great stories. D. Scott here. We're back on location at the Baylor Club. We're on the 4th floor, and it is just a gorgeous day out, looking out over downtown Waco. You can see the Alico building, the Brazos River, and I am on location with Micah Abels, and that's Abels Top Hat Home Services, correct?
Yes, sir. You got it.
This is a company that started in 1980, and we're going to get into the background of that. But tell us, what is Abels Home Services and what are you guys involved in right now?
All things fire protection and fire prevention. Primarily, the number one cause of home fires every year is chimney fires and things related to the chimney. So that's kind of our main focus. And then also dryer vents. They're between the number 3 and 5 cause of home fires every year. Focusing on keeping those cleaned out and making sure they're not a fire hazard. And then for everything that we can't prevent from catching on fire, we have fire extinguishers. And so those are kind of the 3 cores of our service. And then on the commercial side, we also have primarily focused on fire extinguishers, starting to get into some kitchen hoods, but then also chimneys and dryer vents as they pop up in the commercial world.
Well, here we are in summer. People aren't thinking about their fireplace.
Definitely not. It's a little warm for that right now.
But it's a good time to get that done before the winter season. So how do people get a hold of you?
There's a couple of options. So obviously our website is abelstophat.com. So it's Abels, A-B-L-E-S, and then tophat.com. And then our phone number is 254-547-6087 is the best way to get us on phone or text.
Shortly after I went into the Air Force to get out of basic training, we had a house fire, and we were in the country, and it went down to the foundation. I know what it's like to have experienced that side. So let's talk about the prevention side of this.
I'm sorry you experienced that. You know, over the years, there's been a lot of research, and every time a house catches on fire, every time there's an incident, the fire marshals do an investigation and insurance companies do an investigation. We learn from it. And so over the last 40 or 50 years, we've come to find out that the most dangerous part about having a chimney or a fireplace is it being installed incorrectly, or having insulation against it, or having damage to it. And so, there's this idea that a dirty chimney is what catches on fire and burns the house down. And that's certainly true. That can jumpstart things. But also, we've learned over the years that even a clean chimney can still burn your house down. And so that's really kind of where we've started to focus on fire prevention. Getting your annual sweep is important, and getting it cleaned out so you don't have all that creosote in there that catches on fire and spreads from there. But even a clean chimney can still burn your house down. And so that's really where we try to focus on making sure everything's installed right, making sure everything is built the way it's supposed to be, and then also in good condition. Things don't always age well over time, and fireplaces are no exception to that. And so, you go in a house and you have a 40-year-old house, you don't have the same AC, you don't have the same water heater, you don't have the same stove and refrigerator, but you still have the same fireplace. And so it's overdue for replacement a lot of the times. It's got the same damage that your AC unit had, but it's just kind of hidden out of sight and out of mind, so people think we can use it. And we start looking in there and kind of digging the nooks and crannies, you find it's not really a great solution. Our goal is to find that with cameras and our inspection before we find it the way you did.
It's interesting that you were talking about that as houses age, right? You do change those appliances, but those structural things like the fireplace, first of all, we don't see them. And then it's just nearly impossible or expensive, very expensive to change out.
Yeah.
So what have you seen with houses? I mean, is it like a 5-year house, 10-year house? When do you see better construction in chimneys, better chimney technology? How's that?
That is a fantastic question. I don't think I have a great answer for it. There's a lot of mixed bags. You can go back to 1920s, 1930s and find some chimneys that are still pretty solid, pretty sound. I can probably take you around to some neighborhoods that are being built this week and this month and show you some that you definitely shouldn't even use from day one. I'm always surprised that, we'll go to some of the older neighborhoods, find them in good shape, and then some that are built in the 70s and 80s after we should have, known better, and they're still being built like the 1800s. And so that's always kind of frustrating to see. And then also just being aware of what the appliance is. A lot of them, especially if it's not one of the old brick fireplaces, they are appliances, and they only come with a 10-year warranty. And the manufacturer knows it's a builder's grade appliance. It's going to be rusting out and falling apart in 10 or 12 years, but it's out of sight, out of mind. It's inside your wall, and it's just something you don't think about. As you do the look, and those are the things you start to find out.
So I was just talking to a friend who's a real estate broker, and she was telling me about home inspectors. They're really generalists in what they look at. Her whole point is you need to bring in specialists. Does Abel's Top Hat do home inspections if I was going to buy a house? And I'm wondering, is this something I need to be concerned about? Would you guys come in and do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Thanks for bringing that up. You talked about, obviously nobody's wanting to have a fire right now in the middle of summer, but this is the prime time for people to be selling houses, buying houses, moving out, moving in. And so, this is where we can really get involved. So obviously, as you mentioned, home inspectors, they're great. They've got a lot of training and a lot of experience to look at the house as a system, but they're not necessarily super qualified electricians or septic or pool guys, and the same goes for chimneys. One of the things we talk to a lot of realtors and try to put on classes and kind of educate the community a little bit. One of the things, if you go digging into home inspectors' standard of care, both from TREC, the Texas Real Estate Commission, and then their national standards, the only thing they're required to look at for chimneys is that it has a chimney cap and that it has a damper. Neither of those two things are going to catch your house on fire. And the list of things that they're not required to look at for the chimney is like 3 or 4 times longer than the list of things they are required to look at. Kind of understanding, home inspectors, obviously there's a lot of good things that they can talk about in the house, and there's a lot of things they know about. They're not the specialists. They're just like you said, they're the generalists. And so understanding where a specialist can come in handy is certainly important. And so, for us, the fireplace is one of the few things that can catch your house on fire and burn it down. And so to us, that's worth having a specialist involved and taking a closer look at that. And so that's really where we try to work hand in hand as people are looking at buying a house. The same day you put in the offer, you schedule a home inspector, you definitely should be scheduling the chimney inspection at the same time. And so it's required by the National Fire Safety Standards. Those aren't adopted as fire code here, so it's not necessarily a requirement. Some insurance companies and title companies are starting to require that. Not everybody's totally aware of that yet, but that's definitely something we're working with to kind of spread awareness of how we can help you. Like you said, chimney repairs can be kind of expensive, and they can be a pretty big project. So definitely something that if you're going to buy a house, you want to know that if it's something that needs to come up during negotiations or something that you need to make sure you fix before winter, or even just having the awareness, don't use your fireplace because it has a problem. Knowing that you have a hazard there so you can avoid it or fix it as needed is definitely a good thing to know.
So it really doesn't matter about the age of the house. If you're looking at buying a house, whether it's brand new construction or from the 70s, 80s, or even older, more vintage house, still a good idea to call Micah at Abel's Top Hat.
100%. Always.
Run the scope and take a look.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Great point about new construction. Like I said earlier, we get called a decent amount on, like 1 year builder's warranties getting ready to expire. And so the owners call us out to check it out before the warranty expires. You would probably be surprised at some of the things we find. A brand new 1 year house, a lot of times the chimneys aren't even connected in the attic. And so you have the fireplace that's just venting 800 degrees plus into a wood framed wall. We'll have the chimneys, most chimneys are required to have 1 or 2 inches of airspace clearance before anything that can catch on fire. Just obviously the chimney gets hot when you're using it. And we'll find that they have just sprayed spray foam all up and down the chimney, or that the main rafter framing member of the house is right up against the chimney. One of the very first chimney inspections I did, actually, the house was 18 months old. They'd only used it for 1 winter, and the chimney was resting on 2x4s in a couple of different places, and it already caught 2 of them on fire. And so, by the grace of God, it hadn't spread to the rest of the house yet. But this was a house that was 18 months old, custom builder, over $1 million house. And, they were a couple of months away, 1 more winter away from probably burning that house down. So absolutely, if it's a new build, if your warranty is getting ready to expire, if you just don't know the history of it for whatever reason, you just inherited the house or whatever, definitely something to get checked out for sure.
Another thing that's hidden in the house. Tell us about what goes on in dryer vents, because this is just one of those hidden things, and I hadn't really thought about it as a danger.
I was never a Boy Scout, but I've been told that pocket lint is, the number one fire starter. So you ever stuck out in the woods, just dig in your pocket, pull out some lint, and you got an easy trick to starting a fire there. So you think about that in the walls, the walls aren't a place you exactly want an easy fire starter. So normally what happens, everybody thinks about cleaning out the lint screen in the dryer, and that's super important, and that's kind of the first line of defense. A couple of things. So every time you have a load of laundry in the dryer, you're putting out between 1 gallon and 1.5 gallons of steam in every load. So that's a lot of water vapor there. So aside from the fire hazard of it, there's a lot of just performance issues that can happen with the dryer. A lot of times we'll find roofers or original builders put on a roof vent that has a screen on it, or it's just not designed for dryers. And so it just doesn't let any of the lint out. It doesn't let any of the exhaust out. And so then you've got all that steam, all that lint from the dryer that's just condensing in that line. Speaking of new construction again, about 1 year to 1.5 years after a neighborhood is finished, we'll usually get a handful of calls from that neighborhood that either their transition hose, the kind of the slinky foil behind the dryer, is flooded and full of water, or the laundry room is flooded and full of water. And sure enough, there's a screen up on top, so no lint is coming out. So, 1 year's worth of lint is clogged up on that screen, and now nothing can get out of the dryer. All that water comes back. Every spring we'll get calls of, my dryer just doesn't work. We just replaced it, and now a month later, this new dryer died. I actually had one last year. They replaced the dryer 3 times before they called us. Come to find out that dryer vent is completely clogged. And so that dryer, it's doing its best. It's the little engine that could, but it just can't push all that lint out. And so it just keeps blowing and blowing until it eventually overheats, burns out a heating element, burns out the blower, something like that. So there's definitely performance issues too. If your dryer is not drying, if it's getting too hot, if it's taking 3 or 4 loads to dry the towels, that's a sign your dryer vent's clogged. On the other side of it, the fire safety part of it, again, you've got that fire starter. So as you're having all these issues, as you're getting that screen that's clogging the top, that's just a time bomb in your wall waiting to happen there. And so usually what will happen is it'll start to clog at the top, and then the whole pipe will fill up with lint. And then as that gets filled up, then the lint will actually start collecting the dryer and the bottom of the dryer. There's a lot of wires and sparks and friction from the drum turning and stuff. And so that's where the fire usually starts, is actually inside the dryer, but it's caused by the vent being clogged. And then once the fire starts in the dryer, it's just got a hole of a fuse going up into the attic. And then you've got, the pipe bursting open, and then you've got a fire in the attic and fire on the roof, and can definitely spiral out of hand from there. So yeah, lots of stuff to worry about in the dryer vent.
So here today on the WACO Experience, an American Story, speaking with Micah Abel's Top Hat Home Services, just the dangers of fireplaces, of dryers. Let's go back into the history. This is a second-generation company, started in 1980. Let's go back and let's talk about the origin of the company and come up to your involvement in it.
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a long story there. But my dad, back in 1980, he was working as actually a radio news director. And so, they had a fireplace, and he was looking for somebody to clean it out, and started asking around. And Nobody does it. Nobody does it. Nobody knows anybody that does it. So he started to kind of get this idea that, maybe he should get involved in that. In the late 70s were a real big, I guess, kind of a renaissance of fireplaces here in America. And it still tracks today. But every time you have a oil crisis or energy prices skyrocket, then you'll get a lot of fireplaces in new homes. And then energy prices go down and fireplaces kind of go away for a few years. And so obviously in the late 70s with all the oil embargoes and everything, that was a big issue. So fireplaces made a huge comeback here. The chimney cleaning industry has been, it's an ancient trade back in Europe and just never really existed here. Around 79, 80-ish, there were some people started to bring the industry here, said, hey, we shouldn't just let the houses burn. Let's try to clean it up and stop that from happening. And so there was this one ad. If you talk to any chimney sweep that's been around for any number of time across the country, there's an ad in Mother Earth News that was, you can be your own chimney sweep, and here's the equipment and here's the training, and you can go do it. That ad jump-started a whole lot of careers in the country, and my dad was no exception. So he saw that and decided to go ahead and invest in doing this. And so started just talking to family and friends and letting them know that we're able to do this. And so there was a neighbor at a party one time who told them, you're just making this up. This doesn't need to get done. It's not a big deal. And long story short, a few months later, my brother saw their house on fire on Christmas Day, because they had put Christmas wrapping paper in there and caught the house on fire. And so didn't go well for him. So turned him into a believer. And that was just kind of the beginning of things for my dad. So he did this part-time. He started in Brady, a little bit west of here. As they kind of moved around Central Texas, he just kind of kept doing it there. He came back to Copper's Cove in 1996. And so that's when we really set roots in this area. I always tell people it's not a joke, but I was homeschooled and my parents were firm believers in child labor. And so that's kind of how I got involved in this. Starting once we got here, and this is all I can remember for years, just going along with my dad. And so over the years, it turned in from more of a part-time job into more of a full-time gig. And so late 90s, early 2000s, he switched over to start doing this full-time, then started adding on other services like the dryer vent. He did a few handyman things here and there, and then did some air duct cleaning for a few years. And so, that's just kind of what I grew up doing with him. Thankfully, we've come a long ways since then. I look back at some of the technology and techniques and things that we did back then, and it's kind of scary and crazy to think about what we did back then. But thankfully, it's a little different now. So I grew up helping him, working with him, and went off and did the Army for a few years. And, eventually, I guess on my last deployment, my dad actually had a heart attack. And so it was kind of a good thought for us that maybe, if I don't, 10 days later, he was back working on a roof again. So if I don't come home and take the business from him, who knows where he's going to be for his next heart attack, and it wouldn't be good for anybody. So that was a good time for me and my wife to, realize that this is where we need to go, and kind of felt that God was pointing us in this direction. And so we came back and got out of the Army and bought the business from him and took over, and been doing that ever since.
It is not common for family businesses to transition like that. A lot of times children grow up and they don't want to have anything to do with the family business, and so they move on. They're looking at other opportunities. What was your thoughts as a child growing up? Did you ever think that you would go into this? Tell us about your thoughts growing up and then that transition.
Yeah, I can't say I ever dreamed of being the chimney sweep when I grew up. It was something I mostly enjoyed doing it, I think. I enjoyed spending the time with my dad, and it was super thankful for the foundation and just the hard work that I've gotten to see him, and the sacrifices that him and my mom have made owning their own business and providing for us as a family. So that was an awesome foundation and experience there. But I would absolutely be lying to you if I ever said that this is what I saw myself doing when I grow up. But it was just really, at that point I enjoyed my time in the Army, and I was very thankful for it. But we had our first kid, and going into my last deployment, I missed his first steps, and I missed a lot of really key moments. And so, especially the environment I came from, family is everything. And so, I was thankful for my service, but it was time to find something that I could still be there for my family and still, give back in a productive way. And so it just kind of all clicked that this is an opportunity to come home to. At the time, I thought I'd set my schedule. Turns out that owning a business is not nearly as freeing and wonderful as you might think or hope it would be. But I guess, it was a good thing I got into it there. But yeah, I just wanted something that we could be a little more family friendly and come back and, give my parents a chance to. They probably never would have stepped away from the business if we didn't take it over. So give them a chance to kind of have a little bit of a retirement life there. and then just a chance to be able to be home and close to family. And definitely not something I ever dreamed of, but it was just a kind of a perfect storm and a perfect situation for us to come back here and take it over.
You have 3 kids. You have 3 kids now. In your brain, are you hoping that this becomes a 3rd generation business?
That is, I do think about that sometimes. I'm a firm believer in not projecting anything, on my kids. So if they want to go join the Army, great. And if they don't, I couldn't blame them in the least.
Do you believe in child labor?
So I have one, our middle son, he is just all about it. He's got the shirts. He'll wear them all the time. He just about every day begs me to come to work with me, or him to come to work with me. And he is just everything. And so sometimes, I know there's some customers we've been with for a while, and they'd be okay with a kid being around, or it's an easy job. I'll bring him out to a job site, and it's just like the moment of his life. And so, for the next 6 months, it's all he can think and talk about is that time he came to work with me. I'm not going to project anything onto my 5-year-old, but if any of them are going to take anything over, I think it would probably be him. And so, but it's just been fun to see, all 3 of them come up and then just in different ways be excited to be involved. And whenever we can get them involved, if it's just, moving stuff around the warehouse or taking them on a job site, it's great. So we'll see what happens in 20 years, but I'm just happy to have them with us for now.
So it's Abel's Top Hat. And on your website, you've got some information about the history and why you have Top Hat associated with the business. For many of us, our only understanding of chimney sweeps is having watched Mary Poppins, right? Tell us about this Top Hat. What's the symbolism on that?
Yeah,
Where did that come from?
Well, it's a good question, and I think it probably depends on who you ask. There's obviously a lot of lore in this, but going back into the few centuries back in Europe, again, depending on who you listen to, one of the main stories is that the chimney sweeps, was a poor trade. It was just the kind of the orphan kids who they're going to get cancer. They're not going to have a long life. So it's just kind of the orphan kids that would do this job. And so as they go to do the dirty job, obviously their clothes get pretty dirty and ragged there. And so they would find undertakers' clothes. And I don't know if the undertakers would give them their clothes or if they would just find them in the alley or what the story is there. But yeah, so they would dress up in a top hat and coattails. And that's where that started. And actually my dad, for the first 30 or 40 years, he would still wear an actual tuxedo and an actual top hat into everybody's house. Thankfully, as he got older, he dropped the tuxedo, but then he got a t-shirt printed with a tuxedo on it. So he still had the brand there. And so he was still wearing that up until 2020. And not to pick at any scabs here, but I think he's still pretty upset I don't actually wear the top hat to the job anymore. In my defense, it's too small, and I don't really want to go buy another one. But yeah, so that's where the story of the top hat comes from.
Well, the tuxedo and the top hat does work for the Savannah Bananas. Maybe he started something back there.
We should get some royalties off that.
I don't disagree. So let's talk about the future. What about technology? Obviously, from when your dad started, cameras and things like that are much better today. And he may not have even had those available when he first started. What's going on technology-wise? What's the future? And I'll ask you one more question. What do you see as the future for small business owners here in Central Texas?
Yeah, so you nailed it. I mean, technology has been a huge part, but it is a very different business. If you'd called my dad in the 1980s versus calling us now, at its core, foundationally, we're still doing the same job, but technology has completely changed the way in which we do it. So that's everything from just sweeping, again, thinking of when I was 8 and 10 years old, climbing up on basically a cliff of a roof and then climbing up on a 12-foot chimney and then getting these massive fiberglass rods with steel brushes and trying to shove them down the chimney. And then fast forward now, you don't think of it as technology, but using ropes and or if we have to get up on a chimney, using a lift to get up there.
Yeah, so you've got harnesses to keep you safe. So if you do slip.
Yeah. So we've got all the safety equipment that we need to get up there and do the job safely. But then also just some of the technologies revolutionized how we do it. So instead of using these old fiberglass rods that we push up and down, it's called power sweeping or rotary sweeping now. So we've got a brush head that has a lot more flexible bristles on it. You just get a really strong drill and some flexible rods. And so you can do it all from the living room or from downstairs. So, in some situations, obviously you can't get up on the roof. or it's not safe to do so. And so we can, do that from down there. So that's some of the, kind of the basic stuff of the job. Obviously, respirators, it's a huge, there's a large cancer risk involved with working with soot. That's a carcinogen. So, working with how we protect ourselves has changed over the years. And then just probably the biggest step has been the inspections themselves. So we've got a lot of camera systems. So cameras that we can put in different nooks and crannies so we can find, rust or holes in places that we just couldn't even see before. We've got a couple other cameras that we can send up the flue so we can look from the comfort of the living room. We can look and see, get a direct eye-to-eye view to see if something's cracked or to see if something's broken, see if liners are disconnected and stuff like that. There's other stuff. We have infrared cameras. So, if you have a leak in the fireplace, we don't have to guess where it's coming from anymore. We can just put an infrared camera on it and say, actually, that's your toilet leaking, not the chimney. Or, it's the skylight, or, it's coming from this part of the chimney. So it takes away, most of the guessing there. And so all the technology is great. And the other big thing is, my dad used to have a paper checklist, and that's what, the sweeps, they'd say, your chimney is good or not good. And, here's a report and hand it to you. And we don't want you to take our word for it anymore. So we take pictures on site of everything, and then we show you. Say, hey, when I say your chimney's cracked, this is what it looks like. This is where it is. When I say this is damaged, here's the picture of it. You don't have to take my word for it. Here's the picture of it. So we show them to the customer on site. We also email them over with an explanation of everything. So the technology has been really helpful in a lot of the ways. And again, it doesn't change the core of what we're doing as a business, but it definitely helps us just paint a better picture and communicate a better message and just make sure we're doing a more thorough job. And so that's been true throughout the whole business, and, constantly looking for better ways to do things and better ways to see and to show things to customers. So it's been really, really neat to see that.
And the future of small business in Central Texas.
Yeah. So it's been, again, coming from the Army, this is not something I've ever been super focused on what business would be like here. So it's been definitely a learning experience for us here. But it's just been really, really rewarding. I feel like this area, certainly Waco, Temple, Belton, it still feels like small business is alive and well. There's certainly some of the big kind of conglomerates coming in and buying home service businesses around us. But there's still a lot of people who just really want to, invest in the community and invest in small businesses. And so that's something that's important to us, is investing in our community. And so actually earlier this week, we were at the Ronald McDonald House in Temple they had some dryer vent issues. And so we were able to help them out. And so, we work with a lot of foster families in foster communities and adoption centers in our area and stuff. So it's really neat to see us be able to plug in to our community as a small business in a way that, other corporations may not be able to. But it's just, from our perspective, we're literally in people's houses every day. And so we definitely have a very, I guess, a close relationship with our customers. It's just really gratifying to be a small business that's very involved in our customers, very involved in our community, and then also to find areas that community can give back to us, and to find just a really friendly environment and people who are excited to work with small businesses.
The WACO Experience, an American Story, is a production of D. Scott Smith Company, all rights reserved. Thank you for listening.